the Latina Leadership Podcast, the podcast made for Latinas by Latinas, with Angelica Cázares, Carolina Arenas, Diana Ruby, Jacqueline Villagomez, and Sonia Ramirez. Get comfortable, amiga, and enjoy the conversations.
Welcome, everybody, to the Latina Leadership Podcast. Today we have two co-hosts and an amazing author. My name is Carolina Arenas, and I'm with...
And I'm Sonia Ramirez.
And we are happy to have today our special guest, Ms. Jasminne Mendez, una autora, author. So let's get started. So again, Jasminne, thank you for joining us today. I'm happy to have met you in person finally. But yeah, so just give us a little background of who is Jasminne? Where does she come from? Her roots? A little intro to everyone that's here today listening.
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, thank you for having me. And it was so lovely to meet you at that Mixer event a couple of weeks ago, and to just be invited to speak with you all and share my story and some of my background. So I've been in Houston over 20 years. I came here to go to U of H, University of Houston, back in the day. Yeah, go Cougs, in 2002. So I don't look as old as I am, which is I guess kind of a good thing. But I came here, I came here by way of San Antonio. My dad was in the Army for 22 years, and he retired in San Antonio, where I went to high school. So as a military brat, I lived everywhere, mostly the South. I was born in Alabama, and we lived in Tennessee, Louisiana, a short stint in Germany. And then we finally kind of settled in Texas, which was not at all where I ever expected to land. And like most people not from Texas, I had this vision of like cowboys and horses and like hay rolling around in the street. But obviously that's not at all what it's like in most of the big cities in Texas. But my family is originally from the Dominican Republic. And so my parents came here in 1980, had my brother in 1982, and then I was born in 84 and my sister in 88. And so we were kind of, and still continue to be, a little bit of an anomaly, especially in the spaces where we've lived, because there haven't been very many Dominicans, much less like Afro-Latinos in those spaces. We were fortunate that, being a part of the Army, there were a lot of military families that were Latino, that were surrounded by Puerto Rican, Cuban, Panamanian families, occasionally a Dominican family here and there. But for the most part, it's like Puerto Rican and Panamanian, Cuban, et cetera. And so, and Mexican families as well. And so we kind of had our own community in that way, because of other, Latin military families. But it was definitely, and has continued to be, difficult to kind of form those relationships and friendships, sort of outside of that space. So yeah, I came to Houston via way of San Antonio, and I studied English literature and education at U of H. Then eventually also got my master's at a low residency program. And I've been writing and performing my work since about 2007, seriously, because I used to just kind of write for fun and just, sort of my journal entries, and on that kind of a thing. But started taking it more seriously right after college. As I was kind of getting into teaching as well. I'm also an educator. And so that's kind of the broad scope of me.
Though. And what brought your parents to San Antonio? I know we said military, but from DR, what made them?
Yeah, so my dad joined the Army because he had a bachelor's in science and was working at a factory for like $2 an hour. And he was like, this is not the life for me. Like, this is not what I came for. And I want to do better for my family. And he, at the time, saw the military as the best option because it was free healthcare, benefits, a salary, opportunities for growth. And for him, who to this day is going to school, it was a chance at like a free education because they, paid for all of his other university courses. And my dad has never stopped going to school. And so he joined the military and stayed. And so, like I said, we kind of traveled everywhere, wherever the military sent us. We went every 3 or 4 years, packed up and moved. And so they were stationed at Fort Sam Houston in San Antonio. And that's where he ended up retiring. And then he became an educator and a principal, and then left that, or retired from that as well. And now has started his third career back in the DR as a doctor.
Oh,
So
beautiful.
Wow.
that's a whole nother story. But yeah, he graduated from med school this past November at the age of 70. So
And I ask that because I know that your Hispanic Latin roots are well rooted in there. So for those that don't know, geographically, where do we find DR, La República Dominicana, Dominican Republic? Where are you located?
Yes, well, the island of Hispaniola, which is an island that is shared between the country of Haiti and the Dominican Republic, is located in the Caribbean and Atlantic Ocean. So our like part of the island sits near the Atlantic Ocean, and the other part sits near the Caribbean Sea. And so we're there, near Puerto Rico and Florida and Cuba and sort of all of those islands over there.
Our Latin Caribbean family. Just
Yeah.
for those that do not know, there is Mexico, Central America, the Caribbean, and South America.
South America,
And I
exactly.
just share that because I know that a lot of your Dominican roots are tied into what we would talk about in a little bit with your writing and all of that. And Sonia, you being a writer yourself.
Yes, I mean, I'm looking at your resume, and it is a very impressive, you know, dialogue or listing of wonderful works. Can you tell me a little bit about how you got into writing and what that journey looked like for you up until now?
Yeah, for sure. So I've kind of always written, but never really considered myself a writer. Because like many of us of this age or older didn't see ourselves in the books that we read or the books that were introduced in school or the poems that we read, with very few exception, right? We had to kind of go out looking for these writers that represented, us and our stories. But I was always writing. I was always journaling since like third grade. I was always writing these little stories and showing them to my parents. And then I would write like my teen angsty poems. I hate my life. And this boy is cute. Sort of all of these things, you have all of these big feelings when you're 13. Right. And so I was always journaling and always writing. And I loved reading. I've always been a very avid reader. And sort of at some point, I really wanted my goal to just be like an English teacher. I was like, I just want to read books and talk about books all day. And then I became a teacher and I was like, oh, they do a lot more than, than just that. But yeah, I actually, my first real true love and kind of art form was theater. And so I started in theater in middle school. That's the one that I really poured myself into, right? Writing was just kind of like a hobby of self-expression and just a way to kind of get out my feelings, but it wasn't like a career trajectory for me. But I really hoped and thought that acting would be. And then, I got older and life happens and kind of takes you, right? Life is what happens when you're busy making other plans. And yeah, I started teaching right after college. I started teaching theater. And I ended up getting very sick. I got diagnosed with scleroderma, which is an autoimmune disease, and then later with lupus, which is another autoimmune disease. And it became very difficult to function, basically, especially to do something as rigorous and physically demanding as theater calls for. I don't think realize how physically exhausting acting and being on stage and performing really is. And my body just said, no, you're not doing this. I also was working full time. And so the idea of like doing theater outside of work on my own time just became close to impossible. And so once I kind of realized that acting and theater was not the way for me, was not going to be the way, I really delved into writing because I needed a creative outlet. I needed a way to express myself. I needed to do something that kind of fulfilled this creative energy and hole that I was really feeling. And so, yeah, I just started writing poetry and memoir. And in one sort of semester where I had to just step back from teaching completely and take short-term disability leave because I was in the hospital and there was all of these sort of health crises happening over and over and over and back to back. I was like, well, I'm sitting at home. Don't get algo que hacer, because I wasn't like, I'm not the kind of just kind of sit there. Like I did do a lot of sitting and a lot of sleeping, but I'm also like, my brain was just like, was like doing all of the things. And so I was like, well, I have all these poems. I have all of these essays. Maybe it's time to like put that book together that I've been talking about. I don't know. And so I did. So over like a 6-month period, I sort of collected all of the writings that I'd had up to that point. And also throughout this time with my chronic illness journey, because at this point it was about 5 years into my chronic illness journey, that I decided to put this book together. I had been writing a lot. I had sort of a daily blog or weekly blog, actually, that I would post like every Sunday, just kind of chronicling my health journey, my illness journey, because I felt like no one was talking about these issues. No one was talking about things. This is 2006, 2007. So this
Oh,
was
wow.
a while ago. And all of the books that I was looking for about like women with chronic illness were written by white women with cancer, which are all very fine, valid stories that somebody needs to read, but it wasn't reflective of my experience. And so I was like, where are the women of color writing about illness? It like didn't exist. And so I, as being who I am, I was like, well, I guess it's up to me to write it. And so like I said, I started writing sort of these essays about my experience with chronic illness, which eventually became my second book. My first book was really about my Dominican identity, a coming of age story of what it was like to be Dominican American growing up in the South and sort of going to the DR for the first time, which I didn't do until I was 19. I never saw the island until I was 19. And so, yeah, so it was just kind of this process of a way of channeling that creative energy, and I poured myself into it. Then I just started, I found the courage to just start submitting my work and getting rejections as is part of the process. And I feel like I have to thank theater for giving me the tough skin around rejection. So many writers often get really in their feelings about rejections. Whereas for me, I got so used to rejections from theater that when like a writing rejection came, I was like, meh, ni modo.
Yeah, it's part
Next
of
thing,
it.
I was like, I didn't necessarily take it personally. So that I think that was helpful. And yeah, I've just kind of continued to tell stories in different ways. People are often wonder like how I write for so many different age groups, from children to adults. And for me, it's just about storytelling and figuring out, who the story wants to be written for, and finding the best way to tell that story. Hasn't been an easy journey, dealing with chronic illness, and a lot of the symptoms can make writing a really slow process. I don't write every day. I don't believe in writing every day. I believe in resting, and taking that time for myself that I need to kind of restore and refill my creative cup. But yeah, that's really kind of been the journey. I ended up going to an MFA program because I felt like I was kind of writing in this vacuum and not getting feedback for my work. And I really wanted the feedback, not because I needed or wanted another degree, but because I felt like, okay, I want to get better at this thing. Like this degree is for me. Like my first two degrees were for my parents, and I was like, here you go. Like I got the bachelor's, I got the master's in education. Yeah, déjeme tranquila.
Oh, my here. Walk away with that.
Don't take
I
this.
can relate.
So then, yeah, so the MFA, I was like, this is for me. This is because what I want to do. And so that felt really good to complete that for myself. But yeah, and it's kind of just been a whirlwind of things ever since.
And
Well, you answered my question, because I was going to
Yeah.
ask you, do your stories come from true life experiences? And it seems like they do. Like you're that voice that we needed in our community to tell these stories from our perspective. And it's very it's wonderful. Your work is beautiful. I'm going to share a little tidbit. I don't know if you remember, but many years ago, I used to work for the University of Houston, the Center for Mexican American
Yeah.
Studies. And we brought you as a keynote
Yeah.
speaker with Marlon.
Yes.
Lizama, yes, and you were
Yeah.
awesome. Those kids walked away so inspired. Do you still tour, and do you still go talk to kids like that? Because that was great. I mean, they had so much great feedback from your performance. And then even me, I wanted to start rapping poetry when I left that day.
She made you want to rap. I cried. She made me cry when I met her.
Well, crying, rapping, crying.
No, yeah,
For
no.
adults, you went and for the Latin Women Initiative, you did a poetry, and I swear I got chills. I cried. Not only because you not highlighted, but you shared your personal story with your health issues, which again, like you said, there are a lot of people out there in the Line community that don't have those resources, because having a book that shares a story of a health condition that you can relate to, that's a resource. That's like a respite care, that's therapy. But where I was going with that story is that, yeah, you gave me chills, and you represented the woman, Hispanic woman, pero también la mujer, Dominican woman, that day with your poetry. That is amazing, and that I think you keep highlighting with the books and poetries that you're creating. And with that being said, I feel like that's where I want to ask you now. How how has writing helped you with your health issues? And again, we don't want to focus on your health problems because that's not what identifies you, but I feel that it has empowered you in highlighting in your writing a lot of, I guess, creating your own genre. Is that the right
Sure.
word to
Yeah.
use with
Yeah. I
writing?
mean, it could be, I guess.
Mhm.
To answer your question, Sonia, yes, I still tour and I still go and speak to students and people of all ages. I'm actually leaving tomorrow for Ohio. I'm like touring all this month in different places because it's National Poetry Month. It's April, and so I get booked
Exciting.
pretty busy in National Poetry Month, so I still go. And actually, when I was doing those CMOS events, was kind of at the height of my illness. Like the fact that I could even,
Wow.
there were times, I think there was one event that Dr. Cano asked me to do, and I was like, I can't. Like I felt so awful that I had to cancel that day, but I just could not, I couldn't make it. I was very physically ill right at that time. But most of those events I would go and I would like find all the energy I could and just like pour into that performance. And then I would go home and crash for like 2 days and be like, ah. But I love Dr. Cano and I love those students so much. And it was so important to me to like be there, you know, with them and to share my story and to just kind of hopefully inspire them in some way that I was like, I'll do it for Dr. Cano. And you know, U of H sort of being, I was an alumni and that sort of being my connection. I was like, it's U of H. Like, I feel so honored to be able to come back to the school that I kind of started this journey on and to share my work. So I was always very excited to do that. But yeah, it was difficult at times. And so, yeah, kind of tying that back into the other question, you know, my health journey really has definitely fueled sort of my passion for storytelling and for writing, and for creating sort of these multi-genre books that include poetry and essays, and my poetry collection that has a play in verse. And I sort of like really disrupt the idea of genre and the ways in which we tell stories, because I feel like so much of sort of traditional, you know, US Asian storytelling, United States America storytelling, Western storytelling is we expect it to be very linear, and it has sort of these structures that are imposed upon us sort of by like the patriarchy and white supremacy. And I feel like that as people of color, we tell stories with our whole bodies. We tell stories through song, through music, through dance, through, you know, poetry, through performance. And so I try to find ways to make that come alive on the page and in the books that I write, by kind of disrupting and like breaking apart what your idea of a book should be or the ways in which we should tell stories. And I do that because like illness really has informed that practice in me, because my life has not been linear. My life has not been easy. My life has not, it's been messy. It's been complicated. It's felt really loud at times. And I try to capture sort of all of those elements like on the page when I'm writing. And it's also taught me, and like my illness has also kind of really taught me how to slow down. I mean, I'm still pretty good. I still am like really fast and have a lot of things going on all the time. But compared to how I was, it's taught me to kind of really slow down and create a writing practice that works for me, to be very intentional about how I use my time, what I put my energy into, because my energy is often very depleted by my illness or because of my illness or because of chronic pain. And so I've just really learned to be gentle with myself and give myself grace. And so that sort of practice, like daily practice as a human, has very much also informed my writing practice, when I come to the page. And so like, what does it look like to care for yourself? What does it look like to care for your work and to give it the rest that it needs, right? To give what you're writing a break, to give your body a break, to give your mind a break. All of those things really have made themselves, made their way into my writing, and the things that I do, and that I hope comes across, like you said, in the work, so that it's a resource for other people to know, like, you know, you don't have to keep going. Like rest is your birthright. Rest is, you know, you don't have to earn rest. You should be able to take breaks. You should be able to honor your body's needs, and not feel guilty about it. Because for so many years, I felt so guilty for like, ya no hice nada hoy. Like, you know, and I think that's part of like the like that mind frame
That
of like being a
culture.
Latina, of the
Mhm.
culture of like, you always have to be doing something for someone else in particular, but like for your home, for your partner, for your children, for your job. for everything and everyone else, but it's like, you got to do something for you también, mija. Like, you got to slow down or you're going to burn out real fast. And I think that's why sometimes so many of our familia end up sick, you know, and end up tired because, listen, if there's anything I've learned is stress kills, because everything that I can pinpoint related to my illness whenever I have flare-ups is caused by stress. And so, like, what can we do to alleviate that stress? So anyway, that was me on my tangent. I have a lot of things to say.
I mean, it's so refreshing. It's so refreshing to hear you admit that and say that, because it is so important to take care of yourself and re-energize, because I feel like when you take that break and you re-energize, you come back stronger, and you probably could tell stories that maybe weren't in you at that time when you're so tired. And I always tell everybody, it's okay to not be okay. And hearing you say it's okay to take a break, I think everybody needs to hear that message more often. I, personally feel the same. I took a break too. I took a few months off, but I felt like, oh my gosh, I'm slacking. I'm not doing nothing. But I'm going to tell you, that's the first time in my life that I've ever took a break. I took 8 months off because so much was going on with my family too, and layoffs. And I'm just like, you know what? I'm done right now. I'm not good for anybody. I need a break. And it was the best thing I could do, is to take those months off just to relax, just to regroup and refocus. And it's so wonderful to hear that helped you too. And I think more people, especially more Latinas, need to hear that it's okay. It's okay to take a break and take care of yourself.
Yeah. And obviously, I know, especially now that I'm a mom, so I have a 4-year-old. So breaks are what is that? At least sort of long stretches, right? But I found, right, that if you make time in the day for breaks, even if it's just a 10 minutes, a 20 minutes, a 30 minutes, if you really kind of just find that space and try to find your community, right? I think a lot of us sometimes, unfortunately, don't have a lot of community to really allow us the time to take extended long breaks, right? For example, or we maybe don't have the financial resources to do that. Because I'm aware all of that is a part of the privilege of being able to rest. Unfortunately,
the family around you.
Yeah. I don't really have a lot of that. My mom comes for a few months at a time and then she leaves, and I'm,
Same here.
scrambling for babysitters and figuring out, how to make things work. But, I think that we have to kind of figure out, right, in the day-to-day, in the weekly, in the monthly, right, what does break and rest look like for us, and how can we find pockets of it? And true, just don't scroll, don't check email, don't answer people's phone calls, don't, fold any laundry, just siéntate a hacer nada. Go look at the trees.
Yeah, but then you sit down and you said, your brain is remember the laundry, remember the cooking, remember
because we're so programmed to just be doing all the time. And so I started a really deep meditation practice at the beginning of the pandemic. I'd always sort of had a loose meditation practice that I'd kind of come to and leave and, back and forth. But in 2020, I was nope, I need to do this now for my mental health. I have to. And those were the breaks. Those were the moments. Cause I was in a house with a then 18-month-old all day.
Oh yeah. Wow.
So she, she went through her entire toddlerhood locked in the house with me and her father for the most part, and so I needed those moments. She took a nap, I was meditating, or I was, outside just staring at the trees, because I needed.
Oh my Lord. Well, you mentioned, self-care is very important, and is something that has been more of things that I think people are practicing nowadays. And then I've noticed a lot too from you, that resilience that you have. You mentioned in the beginning about managing or handling rejection, and that tough skin is there and everything. But what do you have examples of what rejection looks like as being an author, a woman, and then on top of that, a Latina woman? I want to touch base on that, so that if there is anybody listening to us that is thinking about becoming an author or a writer, I guess 2-part question. How did you manage the rejection, and what did the rejection look like? And what steps can somebody take if you're wanting to become an author, or even just write a book, not be an author specifically?
Sure. Yeah. So rejection in the writing world often feels very cold. because you might get what's called a form rejection, which is just like a short email that's like 4 sentences, like, thank you, but no, bye.
I hate those.
Yeah,
I've
why?
gotten
Yeah.
those, yeah.
And they don't tell you why. They don't say how you can make it better. And honestly, having been on the other side, having done editorial work for magazines, and other places where I'm the reader and I have to reject people, and reject people's work, there's a lot that goes into play with regard to what gets accepted and what doesn't. And each magazine, each publisher, each editor is going to have different reasons why that you may never know. And so first off, that's just something you're just going to have to like accept. Like you may never know why, 10 magazines rejected your poem or your work, or why 10 publishers rejected your book, or why 6 agents said, yes, like it's good, but not for us. There's a lot of different factors that go into it. So for me, I just have to know, like, I just learned not to take it personally. I'm like, this isn't necessarily a reflection of my work, because I've had work that was rejected by X amount of people, then get picked up by someone else, like a bigger press or a bigger magazine, or someone smaller, right? Like that has like, less, I don't know, less of a base or a reach, if you will. But I've learned to be like, this isn't necessarily a reflection of me and my work. This just didn't fit for what their vision of their magazine or their publishing house is. And so I just kind of go back to the work. I go back to the next project. I go back to the next thing. Like I usually have so many things on the table, or on, that I'm kind of working on at one time, that rejection isn't going to stop me from continuing to work on the things that I want to work on. If a thing that I've sent out many, many times keeps getting rejected, then I pause and I'm like, okay, like what is going on with this piece that is not working for people? And that, again, that's where community becomes so important, where if you have even just one person that can like read the work with you or for you and say, maybe it's this. And it doesn't have to be even somebody that knows writing. They can just say, I really loved, this paragraph, but this paragraph I was like confused, or this section just felt like it was a lot, it got boring, right? Even if they can only offer sort of base feedback, it helps you, right? It helps you grow as a writer. So you shouldn't be afraid to grow and challenge yourself as a writer and continue to learn and work on your craft. Like for me, I see every rejection as a learning opportunity. Like why didn't this work for this person? Or why is this not working for all of these, editors or publishers? And what can I do to make it better? And then sometimes you just have to know when to walk away from a piece. Like, this ain't working for nobody. I'm not going to keep wasting time on this. Like I said, I'm going to go on to the next project. Like I just keep it moving forward. But also, not as you're sort of maybe building that resiliency, as you're really kind of delving and getting into your author career, your writing career, self-care is important. So if you get that rejection and it makes you feel like crap, which is totally valid and totally fair and is a normal human feeling, don't feel bad about feeling bad about rejections. Like I just get over it, but a lot of people don't, right? And there's been 1 or 2 rejections that kind of stung. I'm like, really though? And so you have to honor that feeling, feel your feelings, like my therapist says, and then figure out like, how are you going to cope with it? Are you going to eat some ice cream? Are you going to go for a walk? Are you going to dance and shake it off? Are you going to be angry and punch a pillow? Are you going to go for a run? Are you going to get on your Peloton bike? Like, what are you going to do to then channel that energy, get that feeling flowing, feel it, and then out of your body and say, okay, what's next? Sometimes that takes a day. Sometimes it takes 2 days. Sometimes it takes a week. My advice there is like, don't like live there, right? Like you can feel it, do it, and then get it out of your body.
Just don't dwell on it.
Yeah, don't dwell on it. You don't want to sit there for the next 6 months like, oh, I got rejected by, Poetry Magazine. Like, honey, it's fine. There are going to be other poems. There's going to be other places for you to write. Like, it's okay. It sucks. I'm not going to like diminish the fact that rejections suck. But all it takes, and I'll say this, all it takes is one yes. After 50 no's, all it takes is one yes, right? For your writing career to take off, or for you to get your first publication, or for you to get that, that check for that piece of writing. So just, keep at it. If one story, one poem isn't working, that's okay. Give it a break, come back to it later, and keep working on the next thing.
I think that is wonderful advice. Because as me, I'm an aspiring author. I'm working on a children's book. So everything you just said encouraged me, inspired me, and to not be afraid. Like sometimes I get that, like, who do you think you are? You're going to write a book. But you know what? I can write a book too. I love telling stories, and why can't I work on a children's book and put it out there for others to make others, smile or touch their heart. And that's what I love about storytelling. There's so many people out there that have wonderful stories, and they just need to share them and not be afraid and just try. And like you said, if they get a no, that's okay. They're not the only, ¿cómo se dice? There's a saying in Spanish, I can't think about it right now, but it's like they're not the only ones out there. There's other ones out there, and all it takes is that one yes to get you, on that path.
Yeah. And I know, you'd asked about like as being a Latina writer and like obstacles and things like that. And, I'll say for me that I've always found that even if I get a critique or a rejection based off of like, which I don't think I have actually, about the Spanish in my work or that my work's not accessible to certain people. I've gotten that when I was in my MFA program by other students. And I was like, that's fine. I have also, like, I'm very strong in my belief of like, my work isn't for everyone. And I'm okay with that. Like, I write for BIPOC women. Like, I write for Black, Indigenous women of color, period. If someone else enjoys my work,
que lo quiera leer.
and if you like it, if you're out of that scope of reference and you like it, great. You don't, it wasn't for you in the first place. Like, I don't really, like, I'm not going to stress out about it. And also because I come from that performance background, I also know that there will be other ways outside of publishing that I can share my work. Like, it doesn't have to be in this one sort of little box that we have created that says, this is the way to be a writer. Like, you as an author, as a writer, need to decide and define for yourself what your writing career is going to look like. Does that mean publishing in the most prestigious magazines or being published by the most prestigious publisher? Does that mean making X amount of money or becoming, a writing professor at a college? Like, what is becoming a writer mean for you? What is success in this sort of art world, in this business, in this career? Because it is a business. People seem to sometimes not think that it is, but it might not be for you, right? For you, it might just be like, I just write because I want to tell stories. But if you're really wanting to make like a career out of this, it's a business. So then what does that side of it look like for you? What does that mean for you? And there are so many ways to do this that, self-publishing. I started with blogs, make a website. Websites are free. How do you think you're going to reach the audience that you want to reach? And then sort of taking the steps to build that kind of career and that kind of artistic life for yourself.
And this is your full-time career, correct?
Yes, it is now. It took a while to get here. But it is my full-time.
And then so what are those first steps that someone should take if they want to make being an author writer a full-time career? Or is there any kind of resources that you would like to share with someone that, again, is starting off?
Yeah. I mean, I think, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, find your people, find your community. Who are those people that are around you, whether physically or online? Because so much of my writing community doesn't even live in Texas, much less Houston. Oh, wow. They are sort of spread across the United States and beyond. But social media and email chains and group chats and all of these things have kept us connected. And that has helped me create a sustainable writing practice. So that's like my first bit of advice. Like, if you are like, oh, I want to write a book or I want to be a writer, and it's like, well, what does your current writing practice look like? Are you writing once a month? Maybe that's not enough like effort into finishing that book on the timeline that you want, or you can write once a month. That's fine. If that's what works for you, that's great. But just realize then that it is going to take you a significantly longer amount of time to become a full-time writer, to make this your job, right? So what does your current writing practice look like? How often are you writing? I wouldn't say how much you're writing, because that really, as a poet, like today I spent like an hour just trying to like revise 2 lines. So whereas some days, when I'm writing prose, I can write 5 pages in that hour, right? So I don't necessarily think like how much is really, that's not how I sort of quantify anything. But yeah, how much time are you spending on your writing practice? And that could look like anything from reading to actually writing, to researching, to revising, to daydreaming. I think daydreaming is so important, and we don't give daydreaming enough credit as adults. Like, you just need time to just let your mind wander and think about random things, which for me usually happens on the drive to and from when I pick up my daughter from school. or in
Or
the
when you're
shower.
about to go to sleep and you're tired and you can't because your mind's fresh.
Yeah.
That's when I wish
think,
there was somebody recording my thoughts.
So I'll just say there's lots of communities out there. There's lots of communities for Latina women, not that many, but there's a handful of communities out there, writing communities, both virtual and in person, that can help you find your people, that can help hold you accountable, that can help support you. More than holding me accountable, I found that my community has just been like cheering me on from the sidelines. And when you have those cheerleaders, when you have those people that believe in you, sometimes more than you believe in yourself, that really helps to kind of push you to keep that writing practice going. And then of course, there are websites. I don't know if there'll be show notes, but I'm happy to share, some links to different websites that have a ton of resources for emerging and beginning writers, to look up workshops. Like that's the other thing I recommend. Like, it's writing can be taught. There is obviously talent that I think needs to be there to some degree, but there are things you can learn about craft and how to write a good poem, how to write a good short story, how to have all the elements of a novel. And I'm constantly trying to push myself to keep learning. Just because I have books published, just because I have an MFA, doesn't mean that I stop learning about my craft and trying to make myself a better writer with each book or poem that I write. So I definitely encourage you to keep pursuing that knowledge. And then, yeah, kind of decide for yourself, like, do I want an agent? Do I want a big book deal? Or do I want to teach in academia as a creative writing professor, right? There's a lot of folks that kind of lean into that. Do I want to have a job that allows me to write at night and doesn't exhaust me, right? Mentally and creatively, because that often is a barrier, right? People who work full time and then write in the evenings, or who write in the mornings and then go to work full time, it's hard. It's not easy. I did that for a while. It's not, and my husband continues to do it. My husband's a full-time teacher, and he's also a poet. He's also a writer. And so it's kind of hard, right? It means that your projects maybe take longer to complete. And that's okay. I find that sometimes writers are like, they want it done yesterday. And I get that sense of urgency, because I have it too. But you just have to really allow the time that it takes, given whatever your life circumstances allow. But yeah, I will also say, here's the other thing I will say. The majority, because I know we don't talk about money a lot ever in any circle, but the majority of my income doesn't come from the actual writing. The majority of my writing income comes from speaking engagements. That is where a lot of my, like a lot of yeah, where my lucrative income comes from, is because I do speaking events, keynotes, poetry performances, school visits. That is how I'm able to like live and eat and pay my bills, right? The actual writing projects, the money is okay right now, but that money is also very fickle. It's like, oh, you sold a book this year, but if you don't sell a book for another 2 years, then I'm not really making any money off of that, unless for some miracle, by some miracle, I get royalties. Not a whole lot of people make royalties right away. It usually takes time, months to years, to like earn out your advance, right? So they give you a chunk of money up front, you write the book, or you finish the book, you publish the book, then they probably give you a little bit more of the advance, and then you have to wait until you've reached, whatever your advance was, before you earn any royalties. So like until you sell, like if your advance was $10,000, until you sell $10,000 worth of books, you don't get another dime off of that book. That is how traditional publishing works. So there are books. My first, well, not all, like I have yet to receive I've received one royalty check my entire writing career, and it was $7.26.
Wow.
So
still a royalty check.
But my dream, my goal has become to eventually live off of my royalties. Like that would be a dream. Like that's what I'm hoping to like create and establish for myself. But it's not everybody's goal. It's not everybody's dream. In the meantime, I do speaking engagements, school visits, keynotes, and things like that allow me to earn a living as a full-time writer.
And as far as your books, do you have one that's a favorite of yours?
I keep getting this question, and I feel like you can't
That's like the
you
kids.
can't ask your children. You can't tell your children, well, you're my favorite. And then they're just books. But I feel like, okay, so here's what I'll say. I will say that I was, do I have it here? And I don't have it here. I was not most passionate, but felt really connected to and got really upset when, I do have it here. My poetry book, City Without Altar, was published, because there is kind of a sense of like, oh, like I'm done with it now. Like I can't live with these stories and with these poems anymore. And this is how it's going to live in the world forever. And so because I spent so much time researching and felt really connected to the stories and the poems and the history that I was sharing in those poems, I will say, I think that this has been, it was the most difficult. It's been one of the most difficult books to write because of the subject matter and all of those things. But I really loved the way that it came out. I feel like it's a really beautiful book. But the most fun that I've had writing, what brought my joy back to writing, was my most recent book, Aniana del Mar Jamsin, which is a middle grade novel in verse about a young girl diagnosed with juvenile arthritis. And I just had so much fun.
I love the colors. If you
I
can
know,
show it
it's
again,
beautiful.
it's lindo, yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, the illustrator is Gaby de Alessandro, and she's also a Dominican American visual artist. And she does covers for children's books like all the time. And when I knew that I was going to be able to pick, I was like, I want her. I really want her. All Dominican, nothing but Dominicans on the cover, everywhere. So that was that. I wrote. I call it my pandemic book baby, because I wrote at the start of the pandemic, and like that first year, it just kind of spilled out of me. It's the quickest I've ever written a book, or a draft of a book, which was 4 months. But I just had fun, because I think I was also kind of working on this at the same time. And this is really heavy and revolves around a lot of trauma. And I think I was like losing steam and losing kind of like the joy of writing. And writing Aniana del Mar just like brought me back to that joy, and like, oh, like I can write for pleasure. I can write something that like I really, and this book also contains like heavy themes and ideas, but writing it just
not
felt
like a research.
Yeah, no, yeah. And it just felt freeing, and it just felt fun. And it was like, I'm just telling this made up story, which I'd never done. I'd never written like a full fictional novel before. So it was challenging, but I really enjoyed doing it. So I would say, yeah, those two, if I have to pick,
wink, wink, and those two.
Would you ever want to have one of your books be turned into a movie?
My mom does. She's like, oh, cuando te pongan en Netflix. I'm like, oh, it's not
right, Netflix. That's what I'm saying.
It's not that easy. I wish it was that easy. That's sort of one of those dreams that I kind of keep tucked in the back of my heart, in the back of my mind. Like, I don't want to pin all my goals and hopes and aspirations that would happen, but I don't think I'd turn it down if somebody was like, hey, we want to turn, this book into a movie or a series. I would be quite particular, though. I wouldn't just give away all the rights. I would be like, no, I need to read the screenplay. I need to be in the room when y'all do the casting, because y'all are not going to put these
like
non-Afro-Latinos as Dominicans. Like, we're going to keep it real. Like, we need to be able to correctly, cast this show in a way that
we should reach out to Vice. Hello, Vice, if you're listening.
Are you listening?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. I mean, I could definitely see, I'd love to see something like Aniana del Mar Jamsin, on the screen or even on stage. I've considered adapting it into a children's theater show. And I still might.
That would be great.
Not this year. I'm so busy. Yes. But yes, one day. And I also have like friends that are screenwriters that I was like, listen, if somebody ever reaches out and wants to make any of these books a movie, like, I'm hitting you up because I want you to do it. I want to be very specific about who gets to do this.
Well, first I want to make sure everybody knows, if somebody wants to follow your work or buy your books, where can they go to keep up with you?
Yes, my website has all the info, Jasminne Mendez, JasminneMendez.com. Or just, that's the same for my Instagram, my Twitter, my TikTok is at Jasminne Mendez. They're all the same, at Jasminne Mendez with 2 N's and an E, just so that you're not confused or you find someone else that's not me. So, yeah.
If there was like one word you could describe your style, your work, what would that be?
Oh, my style of what?
You're writing.
Oh, okay. I was like, my style of
we could go everywhere.
Yeah.
You're right.
Interesting. Because I recently described my style of dress as coastal grandma. Don't ask. Look it up. It's like a whole thing. It's like linen pants and like scarves, flowy skirts. Anyway, so my style of writing, I would say, okay, I'm just going to go for it because I say this often, is intersectional. Intersectional form for intersectional identities, because I encompass many different identities: Black, Latina, woman, disabled, chronically ill, daughter of immigrants, bilingual. All of these things kind of intersect to make me who I am. And I feel like my writing also intersects various genres, forms, styles. And so yeah, it's intersectional.
I like that.
What are your thoughts on the use or the creation of AI in the world of writing?
Mm-hmm.
I know that's a heavy one. That's why I should have said it before. But short and sweet, in a sentence or two, what are your thoughts on AI?
I'm not well versed enough to have a fully expressed opinion. I think it's dangerous.
Okay.
And I think we need to tread very carefully.
Good answer. Good answer.
Yeah.
Yes, I agree.
And then my second thing, just to close my part out, as a mother, as an educator, as a writer, with all the change in the world as far as, not teaching maybe script in school anymore, or not writing as much as before because now kids are using iPads, not reading as much or going to a library because everything is digital. How do we instill the love and passion for writing and reading to our children or the generations to come? Or what advice would you give us?
Yeah. I mean, I would say I would model it. So even if your kids maybe don't like to read or haven't been reading as much, read in front of your kids. My dad always had a book in his hand. Always, every night after dinner, even if the TV was on, there was also a book, like, propped on his chest, half asleep, or in his face. He was always reading. He advocated reading. He also did take us to the library every 2 weeks. I still try to take my daughter at least once a month to the library. I don't do as regularly as I would like to, but model what you want to have, because that quote says, children rarely do what their parents say or their elders say to do, but they do as they do. They always will imitate them. And I will say, like, try to have conversations with the young people in your life about what interests them, about what you're reading, about what they're reading. If they're not reading anything, then like find out what they like and try to seek out books that represent that. If your kid likes basketball, find books that are about basketball. If your kid likes graphic novels and comic books, go find that's still reading. Those are still books. Like there is a book for everyone. I feel like there is a kind of book that will reach all kinds of different kinds of readers. There was someone that made a good analogy one time that said, no one ever says, right, that they don't like music. There's a genre of music for almost everybody. And so just same thing with like a book or a poem. You have to find the genre of book and storytelling, and poetry that sparks joy and excitement in you. So just kind of keep pushing it. And I also think there's nothing wrong with ebooks or audiobooks. Those are still storytelling methods. Those are still books. And so if technology is the way of the future, because we are in the future, it is the future, it's here, it's now, it's not going away, then what are the ways in which we can infuse technology in our reading and writing practices? I myself, because of my disability, don't write by hand unless I'm just kind of doing little lists or just journaling short things. Most of it is typing. And that's what works for me. And so I think that we just have to find what is going to work for us to continue telling those stories and passing down those stories and adding representation to the stories that are told and published out in the world.
Beautiful. I think that's a beautiful way to close it out. I mean, we're so thankful that you were on our show today and to share your expertise and share your journey. Because you never know, there could be, a young Latina or even anybody, a young reader or aspiring writer wondering, how can I do this? Can I do this? And I think you are a leader in this genre. And I feel like you are a good example for others that it can be done. I mean, you inspired me today. So I'm ready to finish my book.
Start writing.
Yay, go. Finish it. You got this.
And then something that we always ask our guests before closing is, do you consider yourself a leader?
I do. Yes. I've tried for years to avoid it. Because being a leader is work, right? It takes work, and you really have to. You're a leader. You're a role model. There are people that are looking to you for direction and hope and inspiration. And sometimes I'm tired, but I do consider myself a leader, and I take that role very seriously. And so I'm very mindful of how I move through the world, knowing that people are looking to me for these various different things, for direction, for inspiration, for hope. And so I do take that role very seriously, and I'm grateful that I'm in this position. Sometimes it gets a little lonely, but I take pride in being a leader. So.
Oh, well, again, Jasminne, thank you so much. I appreciate you, your time, all the work that you do. And again, yeah, just stay tuned to hear all of our conversations here at the Latina Leadership Podcast. And thank you.
Thank you. Until next time.
What did you think of the conversation? If you enjoyed what you heard, let us know in the comments. And please don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with your friends. Thank you for listening to the Latina Leadership Podcast, and we will see you next time.